He used his fists and fury to build an empire. I used the law to bring it crashing down. Joe, wife-beater and con thought he could bully his way out of anything. Until he met me. I bled him dry, asset by asset, until all that remained was a rusted truck and a smoldering rage. Let's call him Joe. I have to call him something, the man I ruined, but I can't call him by his real name, so let's call him Joe. Joe was a wife-beater. A man sat across my desk, his gaze heavy with a simmering stew of emotions. This wasn't just another client. He was a man sculpted by betrayal, his scars etched in tales of broken promises and shattered trust. He was Joe's brother-in-law, the brother of the woman whose face had borne the brutal imprint of Joe's fury. He wasn't alone in his grievances. He was also Joe's ex-business partner, a bond forged in ambition and shattered by greed. The physical assault on his sister was a raw, open wound, pulsating with indignation. But beneath it festered another, deeper betrayal, a business partnership gone sour, leaving a trail of deceit and financial ruin. This was the catalyst for my client's legal pilgrimage, the fuel that sparked the fire of retribution he entrusted me to handle. The courtroom became the crucible where these grievances would be tested. My client's case wasn't just a tale of domestic violence seeking justice. It was a David and Goliath narrative, a fight for financial restitution woven into the tapestry of a shattered family bond. The air crackled with unspoken questions. Would the stench of Joe's domestic sins taint his business dealings? Could past violence cast a shadow over financial claims? For me, this wasn't just a case. It was a labyrinth of intertwined narratives, where personal vendettas and financial disputes danced a macabre tango. Deciphering this intricate web, separating the emotional heat from the cold, hard facts of contracts and ledgers, became my obsession. I delved into the murky waters of their shared business venture, unearthing discrepancies and unraveling Joe's web of deceit. Each uncovered document, each witness testimony, chipped away at the facade of Joe's supposed innocence, revealing the ugly truth beneath. This wasn't just about winning or losing in a courtroom. It was about restoring order to a world ravaged by betrayal. It was about giving my client not just financial recourse, but a measure of vindication, a chance to reclaim his life from the suffocating grip of Joe's shadow. So, in that courtroom, I embarked on a crusade, not just for justice, but for unraveling the bitter, tangled strings of this tragedy. With each meticulous argument, each meticulously presented piece of evidence, I laid bare the truth, painting a picture of Joe not as a wronged man, but as a villain in his own twisted narrative. Joe and his legal wolves circled me like hyenas, teeth bared, confidence oozing from every tailored pore. Joe, a swaggering monument to entitlement, believed his usual arsenal of bluster and blatant perjury would be enough. After all, it had worked before. His fists and a mountain of fabricated claims had secured him a cushy settlement, free from child support obligations, in his divorce. Perhaps he deluded himself into thinking intimidation and lies could secure another victory. But this time, his arrogance would be his undoing. The trial was a grueling dance of deception, Joe twisting and contorting his narrative like a cheap magician pulling rabbits from hats. Yet truth has a way of resisting even the most elaborate sleights of hand. The jury saw through the smoke and mirrors, and the gavel's final slam echoed with the weight of a judgment far exceeding Joe's means. His swagger deflated, Joe embarked on a desperate pirouette, desperately seeking loopholes and hidden havens for his ill-gotten gains. But it was a futile ballet. Unlike him, my clients didn't waltz into legal battles unprepared. They understood the music, the choreography, the consequences. They lawyered up before the first note was played, their shields raised against the barbs of deceit. Joe, however, remained stubbornly unarmored, oblivious to the storm brewing, until the summons papers landed at his feet. By then, the curtain had fallen, and his performance was over. The satisfaction of the judgment was tinged with a grim irony. Joe, the man who thrived on manipulation and brute force, was now reduced to a whimpering shadow, his arrogance stripped bare by the cold light of reality. In his downfall, he served as a cautionary tale, a testament to the perils of mistaking audacity for strength, and a reminder that even the most elaborate castles built on lies, crumble under the weight of truth and a well-prepared adversary. The grinders were echoed through the grimy air, each revolution stripping another layer from Joe's once substantial wealth. Like a butcher feeding prime cuts into oblivion, I devoured his assets, leaving behind naught but a single rib, a modest house, his last tether to solvency. Rented out, it was his lifeblood, a trickle of income keeping him afloat in a sea of debt. Joe retreated to the unfinished basement, its dank concrete walls mirroring the hollowness of his circumstances. The tenants above were his benefactors, their monthly stipends his meager sustenance. Yet collecting their rent was a perilous dance. He cashed their checks in the neon-drenched purgatory of payday loan joints, each transaction gouging a chunk from his lifeblood. But it was a necessary sacrifice, for he knew any official account would be a shark-infested lagoon for my garnishment orders. Like a coyote hunting in the dead of night, Joe kept his rental property hidden. A numbered company, a faceless entity, held the deed. But secrets have short legs, especially when stalked by a hunter as relentless as mine. One rain-slicked dawn, my investigator snagged Joe's trail, following him back to his haven of shadows, the house that held his last flickering ember of hope. With that discovery, the noose tightened. The grinder hummed, its hunger whetted by the scent of fresh prey. The question wasn't if Joe would lose his last possession, but how long his desperate clinging could delay the inevitable. He was a cornered man, facing a wolf who had tasted his blood and wouldn't rest until the kill was complete. Joe's world had been blitzed into a fine dust, sucked through the insatiable maw of my legal machinations. Asset by asset, his comfortable life had been stripped bare, leaving only one tenuous thread clinging to the precipice, a house, a solitary sentinel against the encroaching financial storm. It wasn't just any house. It was his haven, his sole source of income, rented out to unsuspecting tenants above while he burrowed in the unfinished depths of the basement, a modern-day troglodyte surviving on the scraps of their rent. He cashed their checks in the grimy twilight of payday loan joints, each transaction a bite out of his meager survival. The exorbitant fees were a bitter pill, but a necessary one. He knew, with grim certainty, that any bank account he dared to open would be a siren song for my garnishment orders. For a while, Joe danced on the edge of the abyss, veiled by the anonymity of a numbered company that owned the house. But the net woven by my tenacious investigator, a man with the bloodhound's nose and the spider's patience, eventually snagged him. He was followed, his secret sanctuary exposed in the harsh light of discovery. Joe, a man cornered but not cowed, chose to fight. He navigated the treacherous shoals of the legal system, self-representing against a tide of experienced lawyers. Years bled into one another, a grueling marathon of motions, depositions, and hearings. I, with the relentless force of a battering ram, chipped away at his corporate armor, exposing the fraudulent conveyances he desperately erected as shields. But in the end, the inevitable came. The house, the last bastion of his dwindling world, was breached. A single, mundane act, a trip for a pack of cigarettes, became the final punctuation mark. When Joe returned, the sheriff's cold hand had already slammed the door shut, replacing the familiar click of the lock with a steely silence that echoed the hollowness of his defeat. The house on the precipice, once a symbol of Joe's defiance, now stood as a stark monument to the crushing weight of legal might. It was a cautionary tale, etched in the grimy concrete of the unfinished basement, a testament to the relentless pursuit of justice and the precariousness of a life built on borrowed time and hollow foundations. Clawing his way up from the abyss, Joe had salvaged one meager shard from the wreckage of his financial life, a single, ramshackle house, tenanted and dripping with a meager stream of income. It was his lifeline, a frail reed against the raging torrent of debt I had unleashed. He burrowed in its unfinished basement, a hermit king in a concrete oubliette. The tenants above, oblivious to the drama unfolding beneath their feet, unwittingly financed his grim existence. Their rent checks, scribbled with names as worn as his own spirit, fueled a desperate dance through the usurious quicksand of payday loan joints. Each transaction bled him dry, but it was a necessary evil. He knew with chilling certainty that any bank account bearing his name would be devoured whole by the insatiable maw of my judgment. For a time, Joe remained a phantom, his financial haven shrouded in the anonymity of a numbered company. But shadows have a way of stretching, and my tenacious investigator, a bloodhound with a nose for concealed assets, eventually unearthed his precarious sanctuary. Tracking him back to the house, he became a silent sentinel, a grim harbinger of the storm to come. Joe, a lone warrior armed with desperation and borrowed legal knowledge, fought a valiant but ultimately futile rearguard action. Years bled into one another, a Sisyphean struggle against the relentless machinery of the law. I chipped away at his corporate shell, exposing the flimsy scaffolding of his fraudulent conveyances. Each victory, each peeled-back layer, brought me closer to the prize. His final refuge, the house that cradled his dwindling hope. Then, one ordinary day, the inevitable came to pass. Joe, seeking solace in a nicotine haze, stepped out for a pack of cigarettes, oblivious to the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. By the time he returned, the locks had been transmuted into ironclad symbols of defeat. The sheriff, a stoic arbiter of financial carnage, stood sentinel, the key to his future dangling just out of reach. The house, once a symbol of resilience, now stood as a stark monument to the cruel calculus of debt. Joe, stripped bare and cast into the unforgiving maw of insolvency, was left with nothing but the echo of his own folly and the bitter dregs of despair. Sunlight streamed through the 15th-floor windows, casting long shadows across my desk. Across the asphalt abyss of the parking lot, Joe's rusted behemoth of a truck shimmered like a captive beast. It was Joe's last vestige of ownership, a rolling sanctuary in a world that had stripped him bare. Ironically, it was also the source of our current legal tango. Joe, once a local magnate of scattered properties, had fallen from grace with the grace of a drunken ballerina. The dominoes of debt had toppled, leaving him homeless, jobless, and clinging to that dented truck like a life raft in a storm. His pro bono lawyer, a man I knew from legal skirmishes past, called with a plea, could Joe at least stay in the basement of his former property? My answer was a hollow ask the new owner, because the truth was, the decision wasn't mine to make. The game of musical chairs had played its cruel tune, and Joe was left standing, truck keys in hand, staring into the gaping maw of eviction. But the truck, that gas-guzzling hulk of metal, was more than just an engine and wheels. It was a fortress, a mobile bedroom, a defiant thumb at the fickle fates. That's why I let him keep it, a small act of mercy in a world gone mad. Then came the phone call from the tenants at Joe's old house. His rage had manifested in the form of a driveway blockade, the truck a rusty middle finger planted across the asphalt. To them, it was an inconvenience. To me, it was a symptom of a man drowning, clutching at any piece of flotsam to stay afloat. With a heavy heart, I called in a favor from my criminal lawyer days. The truck vanished, whisked away to a secret haven, hidden from Joe's grasp and, as I hoped, from his despair. The next day, the phone rang again. Pro Bono's voice crackled with indignation. "My client wants his truck back," he growled. "Not happening," I said, the words tasting like ashes in my mouth. Looking down at the empty parking lot, I could almost feel the phantom weight of the truck, the invisible chain binding me to Joe's misery. The ensuing conversation was a dance of legalese and moral quandaries. Pro Bono threatened court, threatened lawsuits, but I stood firm. The truck was more than just metal now. It was a boundary, a line I wouldn't let him cross. Finally, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues. The phone rang again, and this time, a sigh of relief replaced the earlier tension. "Why didn't you tell me the truck was parked outside my office?" Pro Bono's voice was laced with a grudging respect. "Ah, a little oversight," I chuckled, staring down at the gleaming form 15 stories below. How careless of my bailiff. Silence hung heavy, then a chuckle echoed on the other end. "Well played," he conceded. "Tell your client his new tank and oil change await his wheels. Consider this debt settled and Joe free to drive off into the sunset." As I hung up, a wave of unease washed over me. Had I been the judge, jury, and executioner, condemning a man to his own solitude? Or had I, like a celestial crane, helped him lift his anchor and set sail once more, even if only towards an uncertain horizon? The answer, I knew, was lost somewhere in the abyss of asphalt and sky, nestled within the rusted heart of a truck that carried more than just a man, but a story of loss, defiance, and perhaps a flicker of hope. The December wind whipped around Joe's broad frame as he shuffled out of the lawyer's office, his shoulders slumped under the weight of a world just shattered. His boots, once scuffed with the swagger of a man who knew his place, now dragged with the heavy tread of defeat. The lawyer's pronouncement still echoed in his head, its finality a death knell for the life he'd known. Gone was the spring in his step, the cocky tilt of his chin. In its place, a hollowness had settled, a void carved by the legal piranhas who had picked his life clean. His swagger, once a beacon in the dusty town, had dimmed to a flicker, like a dying ember struggling against the encroaching darkness. I watched him from my high-rise perch, the glass and steel a stark contrast to the weathered man below. A pang of something, akin to regret, knotted in my gut. Joe wasn't the first victim of my machinations, nor would he be the last. But he was the first whose ruin I'd witnessed firsthand, his descent mapped out on the concrete canvas of the parking lot. He reached for his truck, a behemoth of rust and chrome, its faded grandeur a testament to past glory. It was all that remained, a monument to his fallen empire. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. The predator became the prey, the hunter reduced to a supplicant, clinging to the one possession spared by my mercy. With a shuddering cough, the engine fired to life, spewing a plume of acrid smoke that billowed skyward like a mournful sigh. Joe pulled away, the truck lumbering down the street, a metal leviathan bearing the weight of a broken man. I watched him disappear into the urban haze, a lone silhouette swallowed by the city's maw. And that's where the story ended. No triumphant phone call, no desperate plea for clemency. Just the echoing drone of the truck's engine, a dirge for a life lost, and the lingering weight of a power tasted too deeply. Joe drove off into the sunset, taking with him a piece of my soul, leaving me with a hollowness that mirrored his own.